I've so many interesting talks today, and I think I'd like to just add a little insight into something I've recently been doing at the University of Greenwich. I think we have lots of problems with our research environment, with the research systems and processes that we follow. I think there's loads of things that we could do better, and I think we've had some really good suggestions today about what we can do differently. One thing that I think is so important to what we do, but really very well recognised or respected or remembered, is feedback. We get lots of feedback from different people at different places in the research process. And I think it's so important that everybody gets really good quality, rigorous research. And so thank you for the introduction. I am going to dip into slightly some of the first findings. You're going to get an exclusive look into the results of a global transdisciplinary survey. And we asked lots of researchers about where they go to feedback, how they found it useful, and what suggestions they would give to other researchers to help improve their research. So I'm hoping to share a little bit of that with you today. I really hope it's useful. So as context, this research was conducted through funding with the Leverhulme Trust and in support from FORT, which is the Framework for Open and Reproducible Research Teaching and Training, and it was conducted by myself and two really wonderful research assistants, Roxana and Magda. So if you see them, do say hello. So, feedback is really important to me. I think it's really important to recognise that we all don't have the same experience as we have gone through our research careers. A lot of us might have privilege that we can rely upon to have networks and contacts and resources that we can use, and some of us don't. And I think feedback is one of those areas where we could help improve research quality, we could improve research culture, we could improve representation if feedback was better, if we considered feedback as important as it should be. And one particular issue that worries me a lot is what's known as the leaky pipeline, which is, it tends to be, as people progress through their education and subsequent research career, those from minoritized, underrepresented groups, marginalized, they tend to drop out. So what we see is research conducted predominantly by, unfortunately, people like myself, which are white, privileged males from the UK and the US and other such places. And the viewpoints, the interests, the values, the priorities of other groups are just not well represented. And that's absolutely throughout the research system, whether you look at, for example, editorial boards, which tend to be predominantly the group I just spoke about. You can see it in retention rates within staff as they go through their research careers. In the UK, for example, less than 1% of professors, that is the highest level of academic role, are of Black heritage, which is massively underrepresenting that group. And similarly, 27% are women. That's not 50%, so that it's indicative. It tells us that there is a problem with the research system. And I think part of it, this is my pet theory, if you will, is that feedback is a key part of it, and it's because it's often not helpful. It's often right at the end of the research process. So we all get peer review feedback if we submit our paper for publication, or if we present at conferences, we might get some helpful comments and questions and things like that. But what we don't tend to do is have lots of different sources telling us really early whether we could improve the design, whether we could change something to make it higher quality, and could give us a bit more encouragement to keep going when, because we've been ambitious in our research, it becomes demotivating and it becomes tiring and hard. And so I think there are lots of problems. These are just a few little snippets. There's a lot of problems with our research culture, with our research environment, the way we do research. We would all produce much higher quality research if we got feedback from users, different stakeholders, different groups throughout the whole process. And if everybody got that, not just the privileged few. And that is, I think, that was a core driver for me in producing this particular body of work that I wanted to share, was because there is such disparity in experiences. There are such different experiences people have based on their geographical region, their discipline region, or indeed whether they identify with a minoritized group. And so I wanted to try and work out what would be helpful. How could we help? And if I could map out all the feedback strategies that could be used across the research process, then perhaps we could help people get more sources of evidence, different voices within their feedback, and that would improve their development as a researcher and stop the leaky pipeline, and also improve research quality. So that was the goal. We have this research cycle that's used here. You can see the core stages of research that's typically followed. And what I wanted to do was to increase awareness and engagement with lots of different feedback practices, and hopefully helping those who are early career or perhaps marginalized to gain valuable feedback into their research practice across the whole cycle. So not just at the end when they've used all their money and their resources to try and do the best they can, but right from the start where we can make bigger, bolder changes based on feedback. And so we tried to ask ourselves these two important questions. Where in this research cycle do researchers solicit feedback? Where do they ask for feedback? My preconception was that a lot of it would be at the dissemination stage when we are talking about publication. That was what I thought might happen. I was also interested in what opportunities there were to increase the accessibility or the impact of feedback. So could we time it differently? Could we ask different types of people and get better quality feedback? So that was the big picture goal. And I will admit, things didn't go exactly to plan, but let's see what happened. So this is a very brief overview. I'll try and talk through it quickly because the methodology, I appreciate, isn't exciting. So we had a brief online survey. It took about 5-10 minutes to complete for most people. And we asked them to think about their latest research project that they'd completed and what feedback strategies they used during each part of that cycle. We then asked them what feedback they would give to other researchers about how to ask and give better feedback. We asked them what their projects were about and what their research tended to be about. So we've got kind of demographic information as well, so we can describe our sample. And what we did is we recruited nearly 900 researchers from 78 countries. I'm very, very pleased that we've got wide representation. That's not to say we covered everywhere we should have, but we did our very best. And this is a little bit of information about the researchers we asked. So we had a fair split of sex. Age was about 40. And most tended to be in the kind of early mid-career stage. And as you can see on the pie chart, there was a lot of social sciences and a representation from lots of other disciplines, but not perhaps as strongly as social sciences. Right, let's get into the results. It's time to get into the results. On average, when we asked people to talk through every stage of the research process and what feedback strategies they used, they reported using a mean of about 5 strategies per research project. And as you can see here on the little graph on the side, it was most commonly at the hypothesis stage where people asked for feedback. Obviously, I was completely wrong. Oh no. What we also see, though, and I think this is really important to highlight, is that people asked for feedback all the time at lots of different stages of the research process, but not consistently. There were lots of strategies noted, but only about 5 on average people would report. Now, across that, 52 discrete feedback practices were identified, and these were these. You can have a quick look at these 52 different types of strategy that people reported using for feedback. As you can see, there are some open science elements, which is great given the discussions we've been having. So registered reports, preprints, these sorts of things. But we also had new developments like AI tools, and overwhelmingly, discussions with colleagues, collaborators, experts were some of the most strongly or most commonly reported. People like talking to other people at their sort of, with similar sorts of roles and jobs about their research. So lots there. I think even personally, I found this whole picture quite useful to think about the diversity, the huge range of different feedback strategies that we have available to us. However, we also should recognise that a lot of these are subject to the same privilege that I outlined at the start as problematic. So having people review, for example, or to have colleagues and experts that people can ask for feedback in of itself represents privilege. So it was quite tricky. I wanted to give you a few kind of spotlight findings, because there was a lot of data, to give you a sense of what you can take home from this. So messages that you can take and hopefully support others with. So firstly, conferences. We're at a conference right now, and a lot of people have been questioning whether conferences are valuable, whether they give us useful feedback. And as you can see from the rating here, most people found conferences quite useful, which is great news. Hopefully, I'll be part of that statistic too. So when we rated them from -5 to +5 in terms of impact, all these feedback strategies were rated as highly positive. Interestingly, there was nearly 200 uses of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence scares me slightly because I think we don't know quite yet how to use it properly, and the environmental impact of it is very bad. But again, it was found quite helpful, rated quite similarly in terms of project development, helpful as conferences, which again is potentially a really good thing because AI at the moment is mostly free to use and accessible. I appreciate their training models. When they become full products, they won't be. But there we go. One of the core findings in terms of the best feedback strategies you can choose if you want to really enhance the quality of your work is pilot testing. So it is incredibly useful. I mean, it's good common sense, but it really confirms to us that pilot testing is a valuable feedback strategy. And finally, training, talking to each other, supporting each other to grow and develop is one of the best things we can do if we want to enhance the feedback environment, feedback culture we have within our organizations. Things like workshops, training, making spaces for us to talk with each other and work out how we can best support each other is really worthwhile. I have a few little more inputs, and then I will stop for questions. What you can see here across one of the most common feedback strategies across the whole feedback cycle is talking with colleagues. I think of it as talking with friends, right? Talking with your the people you work with to negotiate ideas. And it turns out it's quite helpful, particularly at the design and interpretation stage. Self-directed learning, that is looking something up, trying to watch YouTube videos to try and understand something statistical or whatever it might be, again, tends to be really super useful and well rated. And that tells me that if you invest time in yourself, it will be worthwhile. You will value that. And that's always quite nice when it feels that sometimes you are working very hard and don't always see the outcomes. University structures, again, rated as quite useful, particularly in the specific points at which they can intervene. So things like funding, things like interpretation of data. There's when you can get experts from within the university to support you. So that tells us, again, it reminds us that we are not islands. As researchers, we are not islands. We should see ourselves as one big team. And so we shouldn't be afraid to ask for that help and to give it to each other. And finally, social media or online forums, again, they tend to be quite useful, particularly at the funding stage for your personal development. So tapping into those sorts of online open spaces, again, might be a way of getting feedback without the barriers, without the required privilege. So we took the recommendations from our nearly 900 researchers, and these are the suggestions that they came up with. This is now a preprint. If anybody wants to read it, I can share the link. But if you'd like better feedback and better feedback cultures, this is what you should do. You should build a supportive network and frame around yourself. Use the institutional structures available to you. Use open science, which were pretty unrecognized within this survey. Optimize the timing of feedback requests and choose meaningfully who you ask for feedback on what and how. Be considerate of the reviewer and recognize their contribution to your work, and make requests for feedback really focused and structured. And that way you get the best out of people if you make it clear you don't want everything, you just want that bit of nugget of support and help. And finally, some broader conclusions that this project tells us about our research culture. First of all, feedback at an individual level is super important. Everybody found it incredibly helpful for both personal and professional development. Yet we get no institutional recognition for all this that we do. For example, peer reviewing journal articles. This needs to be a more clearly and recognized part of our infrastructure, the way we do research. We should recognize the value of using our expertise to support others. Another one is that whenever people talked about feedback more generally, they would defer to peer review. But peer review is just one type of feedback. They're considered synonymous or similar, but we need to diversify. We need to recognize that we can do better and we can support each other to do better in lots of different ways. One of my favorite things from this research, when asked how we could give feedback better, was a recommendation to being nicer. Don't be so mean. Don't say horrible things. And I think if people are giving that advice, what does that tell us about our current working conditions? What does that tell us about how we're currently interacting with each other, our workloads, the pressures upon us that are stretching us and making us tense and tight and competitive? And finally, people are really often afraid to provide critical feedback, perhaps because of the pre-noted thing around niceness. So what can we do to maximize the value of the feedback we do get? And I think that's a massive one. Ultimately, people really valued feedback. It's super helpful for us personally and professionally. So we should value it. We should do much more to work out how better can we integrate feedback into our culture and into our way of working. We're doing lots of different preprints available to you, and we're going to also create an ebook that talks us through all the different feedback strategies and recommendations of how to do it better. I'll leave it there. I hope that was of interest, and I hope that was practical and useful for everyone. I'm really interested to hear what you think. I'm happy to take any questions, thoughts, or otherwise.
Thank you very much for this very clear presentation, and also for sharing with us some early results. We feel really privileged here now, although this is not a very nice word to use. So I want to invite questions and comments. And yes, maybe would you like to come here so that Thomas can also see? This is a colleague who is a sociologist. Oh, yes.
Hi, Professor Evans. Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Maria Alexandrova. I'm a psychologist, and I also saw you at the Meta Science Conference this year in London.
Amazing.
So happy to see you here in Bulgaria as well. And I wanted to ask you, because at that conference, we had a lot of conversations with multiple people. One of the topics that came up and that relates to your research was about getting feedback from the participants and their experience. And especially in psychology, we work with a lot of participants and they tell us and give us a lot of their data. I was wondering if you've had any observations about the researchers' attitude in terms of receiving that feedback from the participants and how it affects their research.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So one of the key strategies at that point in the cycle of data collection was feedback from participants. And I think it's a really interesting one, because I think in many respects we see if somebody comments negatively about our research design, or we made an error and we didn't spot it, the actions of that in the qualitative feedback, that it's hard to take that sort of feedback from people, especially, they've agreed to invest some time in your project and then they choose to critique you, and it feels that there is this sort of tension. But it was one of a really highly rated feedback strategies in terms of usefulness, because it was, and some of the qualitative comments indicated they spotted things that we couldn't. And it goes back to that sort of piloting type nature. Because of the unique role they have a really valuable insight into what we're doing. Yet, often, most people don't even have a mechanism by which they can collect that feedback. So some people, if they're doing an online survey, for example, might have you got any comments or whatever type question right at the end. But we don't tend to, as a group of researchers, actively look for it. We don't go, I would really like your feedback. If you want to critique it so I can make it better, please do. Because I think, again, part of that is structural, because we might need to make ethical changes or do other sorts of bigger picture changes. But it was seen as incredibly valuable because they had a unique position. Is that something that you kind of shares with your sort of experience on this?
Yes, first of all, thank you for your answer. That was essentially what I was looking for. I just had multiple colleagues at the same conference who were talking about this. And while there is some interest, I do believe that it's important to include it as sort of a requirement whenever you're doing research. And I'm speaking from the perspective of the person that could help, in the sense that we do create online surveys and we do help by making it as engaging as possible for participants to want to give feedback, and maybe to also not sound too mean as well when they do it. So thank you very much.
Amazing. That valuable work you're doing, really, really important. Thank you so much for your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? I'll step in here, because while I was listening, I was thinking that maybe there is, probably you could map these different strategies on some sort of a combination of different scales. And one probably is the scale of formality. To what extent this feedback comes as part of a formal process. Processes are sort of required, but semi-formal, I would say. For example, in our department, when you are submitting a research grant proposal, somebody has to review it internally. And it's like a light touch review. It's one of your colleagues, and you will decide who is the colleague you're approaching. It's not like a lottery or something like this. So the other scale is whether you know and you somehow choose who will be giving you feedback. Or you go to a conference, you don't know who is in the room, and you can hear all sorts of feedback. So I was thinking that maybe these two scales of formality, and also predetermination? Can you really choose, or you're getting this feedback from random people you didn't expect to meet is helpful? I was also wondering if there are cases, if you share on social media, for example, we know that bullying is a big problem in schools. Is anything similar happening in academia? If you share something and then people start writing unpleasant things about what you're thinking. For example, recently I posted about the preprint. I didn't have any negative experience, but I wanted to give a bit of a feeling about the scale because I was really impressed. So this was a post which had about 2,000 views on LinkedIn, but from looking deeper into it, only about 18 people clicked on the link where the preprint was. So we tried to make sense. What does this mean? In some cases, people are not writing anything specific, or they will just say that's great, and that basically means nothing. It's not very helpful. But when you look at these reactions, can you interpret them? Is this also a feedback actually to see what is the real interest, which in our case was like less than 1% of those people who looked at the post actually, and many of them liked it and shared it, actually had a look at the link. Also, even having a look at the link doesn't tell you much because we know this phenomenon of the so-called squirreling behavior where people are downloading stuff and they never would have the time to properly look at it. So there are lots of unknowns where we navigate, especially in the digital domain. My question was basically about, have you thought about any scales on which you could somehow position the various types of feedback and maybe their usefulness? For example, is it more useful if I ask specific people to give me feedback, or is it more useful if random people give me feedback?
Yeah, amazing. I think you've done it you've almost answered your own question because you did it so wonderfully. I think the formal aspect of it is very interesting. What came out from our research was that people underutilized it. So there are lots of, for example, departments within the university that could help with different aspects of it, and yet they don't tend to be engaged with at all. Across our sample, the numbers of that were quite low compared to what you might expect, particularly if you see science as a team effort. You might expect for big projects for there to be funding support for librarians, for press releases and dissemination, and it really wasn't. And I think it's almost a complex thing. If you formalize these feedback structures and these networks, it's great because it makes sure that it's available for everybody if they need to. But because then people see it as a process they have to go through, rather than them choosing to undergo it, it means that the uptake is so low. When uptake is low, it means it's not seen as particularly effective, or people don't know about it well. It's also not resourced well. So the university doesn't have loads of money to buy more people to support because people don't ask enough of the people who are already there. And I think there's a sort of cyclical process going on there. So I think the formalization element is a really interesting one because, as I say, as soon as you make something expected or mandatory or required, the type of engagement you see from people is very different. And so a lot of people then become less engaged in actually actioning the feedback they're given, even if it is super useful. I think the other point you raised is really important as to who. So in our research, we tried to clarify which type of person these people are speaking to, because we can imagine that speaking to different types of people in your career might help at different stages. So if I was early career, I'd probably gain a lot from speaking to senior people, whereas at the end of my career, I'm probably going to benefit most from speaking to a much broader range of people, because I might have entrenched views or might think I know what I'm doing by that point, but I never do. So I think those are really interesting elements. I think for me, it's timing. The core element of it is about when it occurs in the research cycle. So that's something I'm thinking I want to tease out a little bit in terms of results. where these things happen.
Yeah, that's also very interesting, because I personally would think that if we discuss more when we plan at the early stages, it should be good. Okay, I don't think that there are more questions here. It was a long day, as I said, for everyone, including for you. Thank you very much for tuning in and sharing these early insights into what you're doing. I'm sure that we will follow and try to see how it can be applied also in our own practices. So a big round of applause for our last speaker. And